At 92, Van Johnson, Hollywood's golden boy, revealed a wild night with 8 actors in a single evening. And it wasn't as glamorous as you might think. Today, we're diving into the life of Van Johnson, from his tough early days in Rhode Island to an unexpected helping hand from the legendary Lucille Ball, to the romantic secrets that shook Hollywood. This is a story of glory and pain, of dreams and scars that never fade. Are you ready? Let's begin. Picture a boy born on August 25, 1916, in the small town of Newport, Rhode Island. His name was Charles Vanell Johnson, but the world would later know him as Van Johnson. Van's childhood wasn't filled with the sunny, carefree days you'd expect from the Hollywood films he'd star in later. His mother left the family when he was very young, leaving an emotional void that never quite healed. His father, a strict, cold man, offered none of the warmth Van craved. In those days, Van often escaped into his own imaginary world, dreaming of the stage, of bright lights and thunderous applause. Deep in that young boy's heart burned a fierce desire to become a star, to captivate the world. But that dream wasn't easy to reach. Newport was a quiet, small town where big ambitions seemed out of place. Van knew that if he wanted to succeed, he had to leave, to find a place where his talent could shine. In the late 1930s, still very young, he mustered all his courage, packed a few clothes and what little money he had, and set off for New York City. It was the heart of the arts, where Broadway dazzled with grand plays, timeless songs, and dreams brought to life. But New York didn't roll out the red carpet or shower Van with stage lights. He took on all sorts of odd jobs: waiter, doorman, bit player in vaudeville shows and nightclubs. Those were tough days. Some nights, he went to bed hungry, his shoes worn thin, but he never gave up. He practiced tirelessly, honing his singing, learning to dance, and polishing his natural charm. And then, a fateful moment changed everything. During a small performance at a Manhattan nightclub, Van caught the eye of Lucille Ball. At the time, Lucille was a rising Broadway actress, radiant with beauty, a natural sense of humor, and an irresistible confidence. She wasn't yet the legend of I Love Lucy, the sitcom that would later define her, but she had a sharp eye for talent. Lucille saw something special in Van, not just his striking looks, with his red hair, freckles, and bright smile, but his explosive energy, warm voice, and rare sincerity in a cutthroat industry. She didn't hesitate. After the show, she approached Van, chatted with him, and decided this young man deserved a spotlight. Lucille Ball, with her generous heart, did something few in her position would. She introduced Van to Broadway producers she knew. She told them, "Give this kid a chance. He's got something." And they listened. Thanks to Lucille's support, Van started landing small roles on Broadway. These weren't starring parts, and they didn't bring instant fame, but they were the first bricks in the foundation of his career. Every time he stepped onto the stage, even with just a few lines, Van carried gratitude for Lucille, the woman who opened the first door to his dream. Can you imagine it? A star like Lucille, busy with her own career, taking the time to help an unknown kid from Rhode Island. That's what made the difference. And it's why Van Johnson's story can't be told without mentioning Lucille Ball. With those Broadway roles, Van began to turn heads. He learned how to captivate audiences, how to make them laugh, cry, and fall in love with him. His talent wasn't limited to acting. He could sing sweet ballads, dance energetic tap routines, and even play instruments like the piano or guitar. He was a triple threat, and Hollywood soon took notice. In the early 1940s, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, or MGM, the legendary Hollywood studio, came calling. They wanted to sign Van, to turn him into a silver screen star. And just like that, the dream of the boy from Newport started becoming reality. When Van arrived in Hollywood, he stepped into a different world. Hollywood in the 1940s was the epicenter of glamour, where blockbuster films were made, Stars were worshipped, and dreams came true. But Hollywood was also a place of pressure, control, and unspoken rules you couldn't break. MGM, led by mogul Louis B. Mayer, didn't just make movies, they crafted images. They decided how stars dressed, spoke, appeared in public, and even who they loved. For Van, MGM saw a gem. With his red hair, freckles, and friendly smile, he was the perfect all-American boy, someone audiences could trust, adore, and see as their neighbor next door. But one crucial detail shaped Van's career during this era. When World War II erupted in 1939 and raged until 1945, America was swept into a global conflict. Many of Hollywood's leading men, like Clark Gable, James Stewart, or Henry Fonda, enlisted, leaving a gap on the silver screen. Van, however, couldn't join the military. In 1943, he suffered a severe car accident that left a metal plate in his head and disqualified him from service. That accident, though physically painful, became an unexpected opportunity to shine. While other stars were on the battlefield, Van stayed in Hollywood, becoming a familiar face in MGM's patriotic films. Think of movies like A Guy Named Joe in 1943, 30 Seconds Over Tokyo in 1944, or The Human Comedy, also in 1943. These weren't just box office hits, they were films with deep emotional resonance. During wartime, American audiences needed stories of hope, courage, and unity. Van Johnson, with his wholesome image, radiant smile, and approachable charm, became a symbol of those values. He was a hero on the screen, offering comfort to a nation engulfed in war and loss. Every time he appeared, audiences felt uplifted, reminded that things would be okay. These films not only cemented Van's status as a reliable leading man, but also made him an indelible part of America's wartime memory. But here's the thing, behind that radiant smile was a far more complex man. Van wasn't just the cheerful guy MGM wanted audiences to see. He was an artist with emotional depth, carrying scars from his childhood and the pressures of Hollywood. After World War II ended in 1945, Van set out to prove he was more than a pretty face or a wartime star. He tackled diverse genres, musicals, romantic comedies, intense dramas. One of his most memorable roles was Lieutenant Steve Merrick in the Caine Mutiny in 1944, starring alongside the legendary Humphrey Bogart. In the Caine Mutiny, Van portrayed a morally conflicted naval officer facing tough decisions during wartime. The role demanded not just acting skill, but emotional sensitivity to convey complex feelings. Van delivered, and he did so brilliantly. Critics, who once dismissed him as a commercial star, began to see him differently. Audiences were stunned by the depth he brought. This was the moment Van Johnson proved he wasn't just the boy next door, but a true actor, capable of holding his own against Hollywood's biggest names. Beyond the Caine Mutiny, Van shone in musicals like Brigadoon in 1954, where he starred alongside Gene Kelly. In Brigadoon, he didn't just act. He sang, danced, and showcased his versatility. He could croon tender love songs, tap dance with grace, and play instruments like the piano or guitar. In an era where stars were often pigeonholed, Van was an exception. He was a complete performer, and audiences loved him for it. His performances in Brigadoon weren't just entertainment. They were a declaration that he could do it all, from romantic, comedic roles to those requiring emotional depth. But what made Van Johnson truly special wasn't just his talent, it was how he connected with audiences. He was dubbed the teenage girl's idol, with thousands of young fans writing him letters every week. His fan mail rivaled that of stars like Frank Sinatra or Clark Gable. He wasn't just a hit in America, but a global icon, embodying optimism and the post-war American dream. In the 1940s and 1950s, Van Johnson was a beacon of hope, a brighter future after the dark years of war and economic hardship. But as I mentioned, fame always comes with shadows. Let's move to a more complex, darker chapter in Van Johnson's story. In 1947, he married Eve Abbott, an elegant and refined stage actress. But something felt off about this marriage from the start. Just one day earlier, Eve had finalized her divorce from Keenan Wynn, a well-known actor and son of the legendary comedian Ed Wynn. Hollywood buzzed with questions. Why the rush? And why did Van, Eve, and Keenan seem tied together in a strange, tangled web? To understand this, we need to look at the Hollywood of that era. In the 1940s, Hollywood wasn't just a filmmaking hub, it was a machine that controlled images. Studios, especially MGM, held near total power over their stars. Louis B. Mayer, MGM's mogul, didn't just manage careers, he meddled deeply in personal lives. He saw stars as investments, and any scandal could ruin their value. In that context, rumors about sexuality were a major threat. Homosexuality at the time was taboo, capable of destroying a star's career overnight. And Van Johnson, according to many sources, was caught in such rumors. Years after Van's death, Eve Abbott dropped a bombshell. Their marriage wasn't rooted in love, but orchestrated by MGM. According to Eve, Louis B. Mayer and studio executives pressured her to marry Van to squash whispers that he was gay. They needed their big star to marry to quiet rumors about his sexual preferences, Eve said, her voice tinged with bitterness. And unfortunately, I was the only woman he'd marry. This revelation not only shed light on their marriage, but exposed a hidden side of Hollywood, where stars were forced to live fake lives to protect their careers. Van and Eve had a daughter, Skylar, in 1948, and Van also adopted Eve's two sons from her previous marriage, Ned and Tracy Wynn. On the surface, they were a perfect Hollywood family, smiling brightly in press photos. But behind closed doors, things were far more complicated. Eve described Van as moody, prone to isolating himself. He wasn't the cheerful, wholesome figure audiences saw on screen. His difficult childhood, strained relationship with his father, and Hollywood's pressures left deep scars on his soul. When faced with conflict, he'd retreat to his room, shut the door, and cut off communication. This wasn't the typical image of a Hollywood star, but a portrait of a man carrying heavy wounds. But the story doesn't end with the arranged marriage. There was a rumor, whispered in Hollywood's tight-knit circles, that Van Johnson didn't just have feelings for one man but for multiple male actors, sometimes in a single night. And the most shocking claim, 8 actors in one evening. Can you imagine it? A star like Van, with his wholesome image, adored by millions, rumored to have such bold romantic adventures. Where did these stories come from? In the 1940s and 1950s, Hollywood had an underground scene where gay or bisexual stars sought freedom at secret parties. These gatherings took place in lavish Beverly Hills mansions, secluded Laurel Canyon estates, or even on studio lots after hours. According to some accounts, Van was a regular at these events. Names like Roddy McDowell, Farley Granger, Clifton Webb, Anthony Perkins, and even a young Rock Hudson were linked to him. One famous anecdote claims Van once bragged to a close friend about a marathon night with 8 male actors from major studios like MGM, Warner Brothers, and Fox. While the number might be exaggerated, it reflects a deeper truth. Van, like many stars, lived a double life. One was the boy next door, the hero of American audiences, loved for his bright smile and clean image. The other was a man yearning to love freely, to be himself, in a world that wouldn't accept his true self. These stories aren't about scandal, but about understanding the cost of fame. In a Hollywood controlled by men like Louis B. Mayer, stars like Van had no freedom to love or live authentically. They were pushed into fake marriages, forced to hide who they were. Those secret parties, those hidden relationships, were his way of grasping moments of freedom, of truth, in a life full of constraints. But the price of those fleeting moments was loneliness. a sense of being trapped in an image that wasn't his. Van and Eve's marriage lasted through his peak years but began to crack after Louis B. Mayer's death in 1957. In 1961, while performing in The Music Man at London's West End, Van reportedly began a relationship with a young male dancer in the troupe. Eve's son, Ned Wynn, later said Van left the family for this man. "He left my mother for a man, a young guy, the lead dancer," Ned recounted. Ned's account not only revealed the marriage's collapse but showed that Van, in middle age, was finally trying to live authentically, even if only partially. Van and Eve's marriage officially ended in 1968, after years of separation and legal proceedings. But the toll of those years went beyond a broken marriage. Van carried deep wounds. Eve once described him as prone to dark moods, retreating into solitude when faced with conflict. His strained relationship with his father, combined with Hollywood's pressures, left marks that never faded. Sadder still, when Van passed away in 2008, he was reportedly estranged from his daughter, Skylar, a testament to the personal losses he endured. In his later years, Van stepped back from the spotlight. He turned to stage and television, appearing in productions like La Cage aux Folles and The Music Man, as well as popular shows like Murder, She Wrote, and The Love Boat. Even as the entertainment industry changed and the studio system crumbled, Van remained respected, remembered as a star who not only dazzled but comforted millions during America's toughest times. By the 1990s, Van retired. He moved to New York City, living quietly in a luxurious penthouse at 405 East 54th Street, overlooking the East River. It was a peaceful retreat, a place to escape the city's bustle and live with his memories. As his health declined, he moved to Tappan Zee Manor, a care facility in Nyack, New York, along the Hudson River. Nyack, with its artistic community and serene atmosphere, was a fitting place for someone who'd lived at Hollywood's fast pace. And it was at Tappan Zee Manor, on December 12, 2008, that Van Johnson passed away at 92. His death was quiet, without the flashbulbs or fanfare of his glory days. According to records, his body was cremated, per his wishes or those of his loved ones. Though he left no biological children, his legacy lives on through his films, his devoted fans, and the story of a man who lived fully, even at great cost. So, was the story of 8 actors in one night true? We may never know for sure, but the number isn't what matters. What matters is what the story tells us about Hollywood, a place where stars lived double lives, where love was forbidden, and where dreams came with sacrifice. Van Johnson wasn't just an actor. He was a symbol of resilience, of talent, and of desires held back. And thanks to people like Lucille Ball, he got the chance to shine, even if that light was sometimes dimmed by shadows. Think of Van Johnson not just as a star, but as a person. He brought joy to millions of fans, but he also battled inner demons in a world that wouldn't let him be himself. His story is a reminder that behind every glimmer of fame, there are untold stories, unhealed pains. And perhaps the best we can do is honor him, not just for his roles, but for the courage it took to live through those times. Thank you for taking the time to hear this long story. If you love tales of old Hollywood, please hit that subscribe button and share this video with your loved ones. Drop a comment. Let me know what you think of Van Johnson, Lucille Ball, or any star you'd like to hear about next. I'll see you in the next video. Have a wonderful day, and always cherish the stories behind the spotlight.